Happy Tuesday, everybody. Today we're going to keep the subject matter light. We're going to discuss Adolf Hitler. Germany, Nazi, Hitler, the greatest evil that's ever happened on Earth, even though factually and statistically it is not. And part of that learning process for me when I started looking into it was coming across the huge fact that we ethnically, the Allies, ethnically cleansed 12 million Germans. Do you know who else agreed with those Czechoslovakian civilians that the things that were done to the Germans were utterly horrific? General George Patton Jr., you're probably familiar with his name because he was a very decorated U.S. general in World War II who led the Third Army, both in France and in Germany. Well, post-war, they appointed him as the military governor in Bavaria, and he led denazification efforts, because that's what we're doing. We're trying to denazify the territory. That's a great effort. But then they say that as he was leading this, he became, quote unquote, increasingly erratic. PBS states that in April of 1945, he was removed by Eisenhower from his leadership of the Third Army for making inflammatory remarks concerning the denazification policies. What were those policies? He said, quote, "We may have been fighting the wrong enemy all along, but while we're here, we should go after the bastards now because we're going to have to fight them eventually." He's referring to the Soviets. Especially as a Christian, I have got to stop talking about Henry Yagoda. They get real upset when you talk about the Bolsheviks. You want to know why? Because the Bolsheviks were never brought to heel. The Bolsheviks never had to face trials. There were no Nuremberg trials for the Bolsheviks. In fact, many of them came to America, and many of them are in positions of power right now.
I thought it's interesting that she not only was talking about the Nazis, but she was also talking about the Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks. She's right. They never did have a trial, did they? Huh. That's interesting. Was Hitler fighting the Bolsheviks at all? That's left unclear. Why Eisenhower would take out Patton, that is yet to be made clear, but there's some documentaries on that. I think Dumb Portrayal of Good and Evil might be the title of one of those. You'd see why if Patton found out that he might disagree with that. And Patton died in a very suspicious way. You might even look at it as an assassination if you got into the details and the fact that in the museum, the car that they say is the crashed car that he died in is not the crashed car that he died in. There's a lot of interesting facts about George Patton, but you won't, again, find these things in Western media because Western media might be controlled by Bolsheviks. That's an interesting connotation there. Bolsheviks might be controlling things. I pulled a book from the archives, but for you guys who are in internet land, I have a first edition, so you might not have access to that, but you have access to this. This is the Internet Archive. This is the same fine place that has the Wayback Machine. And if you were to type in American International in quotes, you would pull the references for that, which I'm about to explore, which I foreshadowed in the history blueprint aspect in a few clips before. All right, so now I'm going to show you first edition, because it's interesting to see the artifact. Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, Anthony C. Sutton. Let's check out this like cartoon here. Can we get in there? That's Wall Street. Karl Marx, he's right there. It's a cartoon by Robert Miner in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Let me zoom back out so you can see the whole thing. Karl Marx surrounded by appreciative audience of Wall Street financiers, John D. Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, John D. Ryan of National City Bank, Morgan partner George Perkins, immediately behind Karl Marx is Teddy Roosevelt, leader of the Progressive Party. And they are delighted. They are delighted with that communism. Title of this book is Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, and this was printed in 1974, and it has interesting table of contents, so we're going to jump in here. Actors on the revolutionary stage. Trotsky leaves New York to complete the revolution. That's interesting. Lenin and German assistants for the Bolshevik Revolution. This is very interesting. Wall Street and World Revolution, which is communism. American bankers and the czarist loans. So then he's going to get into the setting up of the infrastructure here soon. But before we can get there, American Red Cross mission, consolidation and export of the revolution. And this is Lloyd George. He's Prime Minister of the UK. You telling me the UK's got something to do with this Bolshevik Revolution? The Bolsheviks returned to New York. Then they have the Western establishment participation with the bankers. JP Morgan gives a little help to the other side. Alliance of the bankers in the revolution. This is why I always think it's funny when the communists are like protesting Wall Street. They don't even read books. The Jewish conspiracy theory of the Bolshevik Revolution. We might have to go to Appendix 2 and look at page 185. But why I brought this up is for what I'm going to put on screen right now. You can see the search, American International. We're going to start to look at the various references here. American International. Can I enlarge this for you? Yes, I can. All right. So there's the American International Corporation. That's on page 127. And the influence of American International on the revolution. So you're telling me that these, well, I'm not telling you yet. He was telling me when I read this book that the people who helped to bring about the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, which is listed right below that, are the people who brought the communist revolutions of Soviet Union and later China to the world. That's like 100 million people. That would be literally way worse than Hitler if only people knew and didn't assume that the people who were in power had nothing to do with it. Let's go to the influence. We went there, N16. All right, chapter 1. You don't have to read far into Sutton's book to find the American International Corporation. The actors on the revolutionary stage. Dear Mr. President, I am in sympathy with the Soviet form of government as that best suited for the Russian people. Now, that's a letter to President Woodrow Wilson from William Lawrence Saunders, chairman of Ingersoll Rand Corporation, director of the American International Corporation, and deputy chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. They, them, those who can easily be named, who are ruling us. This the frontispiece of this book was drawn by cartoonist Robert Miner, and we've already gone over that part. All right, so let's go to the next reference. This would be, where are we on? 3. Letter. Here we go. Brockdorff Rantzau's ideas of directing or controlling the revolutionaries parallel, as we shall see, those of Wall Street financiers. It was J.P. Morgan in the American International Corporation that attempted to control both domestic and foreign revolutionaries in the United States for their own purposes. So they've already been doing it here, might have been doing it during Civil War times, but it would probably be under a different name. So let's go to the next reference. But there were influential counterforces at work as early as November 28, 1917. Colonel House cabled President Woodrow Wilson from Paris that it was exceedingly important that the U.S. newspaper comments advocating that Russia should be treated as an enemy be suppressed. The next month, William Franklin Sands, executive secretary of the Morgan-controlled American International Corporation. So now you see, AIC is a Morgan-controlled entity. Where did Morgan get his money? Where did J.P. Morgan become a thing? Oh, that's right. His dad was Junius Spencer Morgan. And if we type in Junius, he's the only Junius over here in the history blueprint. Junius. Oh, wait, there's Junius Brutus Booth. I wonder, no, there's no relation to that. Junius Spencer Morgan. We're not going to get into the Abraham Lincoln assassination or the likely conspirators. He's a guy who worked for George Peabody and Company. He's the progenitor of the Morgan Empire. He ran a bank called J.S. Morgan and Company back in the mid 1800s before J.P. Morgan was born. And Kuhn Loeb Company. That goes back to the Federal Reserve and Rothschild banking empire. Okay, so now you see Morgan is a couple levels down in the pyramid, but that's his dad worked for them, and that's how he ends up becoming a thing later to make J.P. Morgan and Company, who, through the Jekyll Island meeting, brought the Federal Reserve. And as Sutton is pointing out, these people also funded the Nazis. that are in control of things still to this day. So just wanted to point that out for you. Going back over to the document, let's continue going through here. That was N47. Okay, so let me just continue. Previously mentioned by Basil Miles and submitted a memorandum that described Lenin and Trotsky as appealing to the masses, and that urged U.S. to recognize Russia. For American socialist Walling complained to the Department of State about the pro-Soviet attitude of George Creel of the Creel Committee, Herbert Swope, William Boyce Thompson of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. So again, the same people that are bringing you the Federal Reserve are over in Soviet Union setting things up. Let's go to Wall Street and World Revolution. What you radicals and we who hold opposing views differ about is not so much the end as the means, not so much what should be brought about as how it should and can be brought about. That's Otto Kahn, director, American International Corporation, and partner, Kuhn Loeb and Company, speaking to the League for Industrial Democracy in 1924. So that's interesting. A lot of AIC people are showing up in all these strategic places that helped the Americans embrace at first the communists and Soviet Union, later to be a feeding frenzy for the war lobby. Let's go over here. What's this one say? Let's see. Let's go back up to the top. On May 24th, 1916, Ambassador Francis in Petrograd sent the following cable to the State Department of Washington for forwarding to Frank Arthur Vanderlip, then chairman of National City Bank in New York. You know, Frank Vanderlip, he's a common character in history. Let's just hop over to the history blueprint. Let's type in Vanderbilt. A lot of Vanderbilts. Frank Vanderlip. And he also probably had kids too. So let's disambiguate. Brought up, oh, he's part of the Century Club. Oh, we're going to have to take a look at the folks in the Century Club. Aldous Huxley, Alan Dulles, people who brought you the Bilderberg Group, lots of Rhodes Scholars, Frank Altschul, Felix Frankfurter. I mean, George Kennan, he sat in Hitler's box at the 1930-something Olympics. You got some movers and shakers here. Jack McCloy, McGeorge Bundy, Skull and Bones, the guy who wrote the Oswald memo, the Rhodes Scholar Katzenbach. I mean, Robert Lovett, Skull and Bones. It's a very interesting club, that Century Club / Century Association. Might be part of the Anglo-American establishment. Definitely part of the AIC funding. And it's got some, this is like a secret key to everything almost. But let's just go back for a second, because that's just Frank Vanderlip's part-time Century Club. He's he comes up under the Rockefeller Empire, University of Chicago. All right. Oh, he's at the Jekyll Island meeting? He's part of the guys that bring in the Federal Reserve? That's pretty fascinating. So these are the people who brought us communism, huh? Huh. That's interesting. Well, let's go back over here. Let's keep reading, getting educated on this. On May 24th, 1916, Ambassador Francis, you got that part. We went to Vanderlip. So it says May 24th, 1 p.m. For Vanderlip, National City Bank, New York. 5. Our previous opinions credit strengthened. I'm sorry. I need to enlarge it to be able to see it on this monitor. It's a common thing that happens with people trying to read and produce content at the same time. Let's see. In view of guarantee of exchange rate, have placed rate somewhat above present market. Owing unfavorable opinion, created long delay, and have on personal responsibility offered to take $25 million. We think a portion should be retained by the bank and allied institutions. With cause respect customs bonds become practical lien on more than $150 million per annum, making customs absolute security and secures the market even if it defect. Interesting. We consider 3 years option on bonds very valuable, and for that reason, the amount of ruble credit should be enlarged by group or by distribution to close friends. American International should take block, and we should inform government. Think group should be informed at once to take and issue bonds. Should secure full cooperation guarantee. suggests you see Jack, that's J.P. Morgan Sr., use every endeavor to get him to really work. Otherwise, cooperate, guarantee from new group. Now, it reads hard because it's probably like a telegraph message back in the day. You know, this cable, it's a cable. So they don't use all the words. They expect you to be an adult and interpolate. All right, so let's go to next. Wait, there's more. There are several more points to note about the cable above under the official story that follows. First, note the reference to American International Corporation, a Morgan firm, and a name that turns up again and again in this story. Second, guarantee refers to Guarantee Trust Corporation, which later became JP Morgan. Third, Mac Roberts was Samuel Mac Roberts, a vice president and executive manager of National City Bank. So apparently, bankers have front companies that, you know, provide infrastructure for communism, which killed 100 million people. And I'm not saying the bankers are bad. I'm saying maybe these people shouldn't be so influential in our governmental structure and stick to finance and maybe loaning out money. But this whole thing where it creates a war machine seems to still be a problem. Let's go to the next reference. Ooh, there it is. First, I'm going to have to go. The major German loans raised in the United States between 1915 and 1918, according to Heinzen, were as follows. The first loan of $400,000 was made September 14 by the investment bankers Kuhn Loeb and Company, who were partial to creating the Federal Reserve. Collateral 25 million marks was deposited with Max Warburg in Hamburg. Now, there were three or four Warburg brothers. Let's go back. Let's see who Max is, because Max is the German one. And Felix and Paul and the other guys were in Wall Street. So if we have Max Warburg, who's his brothers? So you got Sigmund. Let's go to the Warburg family real quick, because they were inculcated, they were trained literally in the Rothschild house. Like, they used to share a house, and that's where they got trained, and then they were sent to America to set up banking. And so you've got Abby Warburg, Frederick Warburg, Halmar Schack, James Paul Warburg. He's one of the sons that says you'll have world government whether you like it or not. Max Warburg, Otto Warburg. He's the one that has the cancer hypothesis. Paul Moritz Warburg. So I think it's Paul, Max, and where's the older brother? Maybe it is James. Oh, that's the United Nations Charter. I mean, this is nothing to worry about when people say things like this. Oh, wait, there you go. It's James Warburg before the subcommittee of the United Nations. So the ability to look into what is Sutton telling you and who are these people, and it might be like multi-generational what's going on. Might be several generations working toward a plan that each generation here is just told, oh, it's a conspiracy theory. You shouldn't listen to Anthony C. Sutton, even though Zbigniew Brzezinski says, if you want to know about these things, you should read Anthony C. Sutton, right? He says that in Between Two Ages, America's Role in the Technotronic Era. This is why we read Sutton, because Z-Big told us to. So you've got these big banking houses that are involved with the Federal Reserve Bank loaning money to countries during the war. Now, let me go back one page and go to the then German ambassador, Count von Bernstorff, had recounted his friendship with Adolf von Panstelt, a senior partner at Amsnick and Company, which was controlled in November 1917 by AIC. American international figures prominently in the later chapters. Its board of directors contained key names on Wall Street: Rockefeller, Kahn, Stillman, DuPont, Winthrop, etc. According to von Bernstorff, von Panstedt was intimately acquainted with all the members of the embassy. So there is a large network that is at work behind the scenes that, you know, this is wartime in Germany. They're setting up the Bolshevik Revolution before it happens. And that's where you learn about the train rides across Germany and their trips to New York and all that other good stuff. So we do have a next block, and this helps to set it up, because I don't think that the average viewer at home understands that, like, the people of Israel, they were lied to put them there in the first place. They're lied to about who the Palestinians are, what rights Palestinians have, all that sort of stuff. My point is, none of the citizens in any of the countries involved are making it through unscathed. The people who make it unscathed are the people who never were put to trial. the people who actually funded the Nazis, the people who actually funded the Bolsheviks, the people who actually funded Pol Pot and Mao and a whole bunch of other tragedies in the 20th and ongoing in the 21st century. And if we fail to read our history, we are going to be doomed to continue to repeat it. And they are repeating history. And they're 100 years or 110 years at this point into this, just this Federal Reserve story angle of it. But along that way, they've made literally Hitler, literally Stalin, literally Lenin, literally Pol Pot and Mao, right? So these things continue to go on because there has been no adjudication of these matters heretofore. So let's go on. We're going to learn a little bit about Israel's got its own Gitmo for Palestinians. You know, when they kidnap people, but they're wearing uniforms, they're not hostages. So Israel wasn't holding 10,000 plus Palestinian hostages on 10/6. Right? You can't see it like that because they had uniforms when they kidnapped those people from their houses and traumatized those kids for the rest of their lives. So let's go. GDF's bringing us the first video, Life in Israel's Gitmo. And then the second one's coming to us from Richard Medhurst. It's more about evidence newly revealed on the Hannibal Directive used on 10/7.
The journey begins with you, hiding in your home or your encampment or an UNRWA school, sheltering yourself amid bombardment and Israeli troops on patrol. But they find you. Israeli soldiers cordon off the whole neighborhood. Men, women, and children are undressed except for their underwear and made to kneel in the street for hours. According to an investigation by the Israeli 972 magazine, more than 660 Gazans are currently known to be detained in Israeli prisons as of January 5th. The Israeli army refuses to reveal an additional number, which could be as high as several thousand. Many of them being held at military bases, which Euromed Monitor have called the new Guantanamo. Because they're not under the Israeli prison administration, they are not held under legal detention circumstances. They are not allowed to speak to lawyers or the Red Cross. They are effectively disappeared.
This has just been published by Haaretz, by the Israeli paper, and it confirms what we've been saying all along, that the Israelis killed their own people on October 7th, and this was done using the Hannibal Directive. And let's look at the article. It's called IDF ordered Hannibal Directive on October 7 to prevent Hamas taking soldiers captive. I'll interrupt reading this to perhaps show you some of the footage from a helicopter from October 7. You can see where they're destroying all the tanks. The homes are being destroyed by the tanks. So you have Israeli tanks firing at their own settlers. Okay.
Wow.
I think we've gotten the point of that evidence and put it on the record. Let's go back over, because we were only a few entries into the American International Corporation being a Morgan-controlled firm that helped to drive the Bolshevik Revolution, which then caused a lot of trouble all the way into World War II and Tiny Mustache Man, all the way up through the creation of Israel, and a whole lot of people that were Russian Jews who then went to Palestine to make a home. We're going to learn about that in the next clip with Walter Veith. But before we can continue on, exporting the revolution. Okay, so we start to see a pattern kind of emerge. But if we go to this next entry, it's very interesting because we start getting into the Bankers Club. Now, it's interesting. The Bankers Club was located on the 34th floor of the Equitable Building in New York. The tenant list in 1917, in effect, reflected American involvement in the Bolshevik Revolution and its aftermath. That's interesting. American involvement in the Bolshevik Revolution was coming from the Bankers Club down on Wall Street, 120 Broadway, Equitable Life Building. Interesting, because that's not how it's taught. That's certainly not how the communists around protesting today understand it. It's fascinating. The offices of several individual directors of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York and, most importantly, American International Corporation were also at 120 Broadway. They all had shared buildings. By way of contrast, Ludwig Martens, appointed by the Soviets as the first Bolshevik ambassador to the United States and head of the Soviet Bureau, was in 1917 the vice president of Weinberg and Posner, and also had offices at 120 Broadway. Wonder if he's related to the Posner that later shows up in the JFK records and the Posner that runs around today talking about the place that had a Sandy fishhook going on out there. Is this concentration an accident? The book asks. Does the geographical contiguity have any significance? Before attempting to suggest an answer, we have to switch our frame of reference and abandon the right-left spectrum of political analysis. With an almost unanimous lack of perception, the academic world has described and analyzed international political relations in the context of an unrelenting conflict between capitalism and communism. And rigid adherence to this Marxian formula has distorted what? We're going to have to keep reading. Modern history. Oh, okay. So it is good that we read some history. You know, DeSantis had said a couple weeks ago, you know, you ought to read your history. Tossed out from time to time are odd remarks to the effect that the polarity is indeed spurious, but these are quickly dispatched to limbo. For example, Carol Quigley, professor of international relations at Georgetown University, made the following comment on the House of Morgan. More than 50 years ago, the Morgan firm decided to infiltrate the left-wing political movements in the United States. This was relatively easy to do since these groups were starved for funds. That's interesting because the left-wing groups up until the 1900s, they were funded by the Rothschild bankers. And they had their delegate, August Belmont, in control of the Democratic National Party. So it's interesting that the same people were later starved for funds and they had to make this move to Morgan, which is also just back to the Rothschild bankers. That's interesting. Continuing to quote Quigley, and eager for a voice to reach the people, Wall Street supplied both. The purpose was not to destroy, dominate, or take over. Ellipses. Professor Quigley's comment, apparently based on confidential documentation, has all the ingredients of a historical bombshell if it can be supported. We suggest that the Morgan firm infiltrated not only the domestic left, as noted by Quigley, but also the foreign left, that is, the Bolshevik movement and the Third International. Even further, through friends in the U.S. State Department, Morgan and allied financial interests, particularly the Rockefeller family, have exerted a powerful influence over the U.S.-Russian relations from World War I to present. We might call them the war lobby. The evidence presented in this chapter will suggest that two operational vehicles for infiltrating or influencing foreign revolutionary movements were located at 120 Broadway. The first, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, heavily laced with Morgan appointees. The second, the Morgan-controlled American International Corporation. Further, there was an important interlock between the Federal Reserve Bank of New York and the AIC. A guy named C.A. Stone, the president of AIC and director of the Federal Reserve Bank. Now it gets into the American International Corporation, was organized November 22nd, 1915. You know, November 22nd is a famous day in American history, not because AIC was founded, but because JFK exited. Interesting. Who might have been in power to take out a president and cover it up. The general office of AIC was at 120 Broadway. Huh. Let's flip right. Let's go to the top of the page. This is fascinating. The company's charter authorized it to engage in any kind of business except banking and public utilities in any country in the world. The stated purpose of the corporation was to develop domestic and foreign enterprises and to extend American activities abroad and to promote the interests of American and foreign bankers, business, and engineering. It's almost like globalism incorporated. Frank A. Vanderlip has described in his memoirs how American International was formed and the excitement created on Wall Street over its business potential. Yeah, I'll bet. We could play both sides of the war, fellas. So anyway, there's many, many more references in this book, and I'll scroll down the left. Watch. Look at all these references. You can learn all about something that is at the root of all this antics today of whatever ism, socialism, communism, it's another form of slavery. So is cartel capitalism, right? I'm looking for free enterprise, people contracting with people directly without a middleman that has American International or Federal Reserve in the contract. Don't want to use their products, don't want to deal with their people. I mean, there's a lot of American International in that history. And again, this book is titled what? Anthony Sutton, Wall Street, and the Bolshevik Revolution. There's also Wall Street and Hitler and Wall Street and FDR, just so you don't go thinking that the bankers were, prejudiced. They worked with all sides to manage you, your family, your grandchildren, and to steal the future wealth of all of humanity. So it's kind of a big deal. Maybe people want to read a little bit more about such things so that you don't get duped. Because I hear a lot of guys out there, whether it's Roger Waters, his dad was a communist, or Jimmy Dore, he's like communist, socialist, or a lot of people, right? But at the end of the day, is the problem really capitalism? Using of Federal Reserve notes is a problem, but is the free enterprise, free exchange of goods and trade outside of the opium monopoly, which you're also going to hear about tonight, because this is where the free, let me show you where free trade comes from, because I'm describing something that it's not utopian. It just means not controlled by a cartel, maybe controlled by honest people, but we can go into it. In fact, no. I don't want to get distracted too far off our show card.
Twice a year, I teach a course called Autonomy. It's a 12-week course. It teaches leadership, entrepreneur skills, executive skills, all these types of things that I saw were taken out of our education system in order to make the schooling or indoctrination system that we've all probably went through. And it has served us well enough to be interchangeable cogs in the machine of the globalists. But if we want a homestead, if we want write our own ticket, work from home job, work from anywhere type of situation, they're not exactly handing those out at the end of college. They give you a piece of paper and they're like, good luck. So reality is dropping us off here, but the demands of reality are up here. So I created Autonomy to help people close that gap for themselves so they can level up their skills to the demands of the situations that life is putting in front of us presently. Life's demands of intellect and understanding precision and complexity are ever increasing. The schooling didn't prepare us for it. The media is not going to do anything but reinforce what schooling prepared us for. And so we're going to have to take a leadership position and take steps off the beaten path to kind of blaze our own trail in life. What makes the Grand Theft World podcast unique, invigorating, exciting, and informative? Most other podcasts out there are either doing straight up interviews or they're just covering the daily news. They're covering current events from the day they happened. And that is effective. It's useful. It's a great starting point. And then sometimes these current events change during the week past the first story. So we like to give it a little time. You have to wait till some of the dust settles on these stories in order to give them accurate coverage. And the other thing that's really missing in the media landscape is covering the articles that are coming out every day. That's great. That's necessary. But who's bringing in contextual history so that you can understand what has been going on for decades and decades to lead up to the machinations and actions that we see unfolding today? So what we do here on the podcast is we cover current events. Many of these things are censored, but we wait about a week. As a forensic historian, I focused mainly through my career on the history of globalism and collectivism and things that they call maybe the New World Order. There's a lot of facts to these sort of circumstances, groups, events, activities, working groups that they've had over time. So for Grand Theft World listeners, we not only break down the current events, most of which that are censored during the week, we provide you with contextual history, we give you the source notes, the references, we do deep dives, and this really empowers you with an understanding of context and history so that you can make more informed decisions in your life. There's also a community, a membership where you guys can actually ask questions and we can get into the show and we can share evidence. And there's a town hall weekly for Grand Theft World for those who listen to it and are interested in covering the stories that we don't get to during a 6-hour show. Listening to it an hour a day, you could easily consume the week's news, but you're going to have substance and meaning and context and understanding. And with that, you can make higher quality decisions in your life. So if you're interested in more quality in your life, go to grandtheftworld.com, click podcast at the top, and we'll see you there. Thank you.
These allegations are false.
This isn't Grand Theft Auto, folks. This isn't a video game.
What are the most surprising things that you discovered once you started pulling on that thread? Who he was connected to, what institutions he was influential over, what events he participated in?
Come on, man. What are we talking about? Come on, man. No.
You don't have to think about it, dude.
I got this quote because you said you didn't know much about Klaus Schwab. I made it my job to, as soon as this happened, I'm like, okay, this guy's their front man. Let me learn about the official history of the World Economic Forum. I got their 40-year history. I got every book that Klaus Schwab has written or ghostwritten. I went through those books. This is one of the most interesting passages.
Come on, man. Come